"We've got some easier classes your daughter can try first," the instructor said with a smirk, looking Maya Hunter up and down. He hadn't asked her name, hadn't asked her daughter's, just saw the long braids, the weathered sneakers, and the plain sweatshirt, and decided she must be here by mistake. 3 mothers in yoga sets glanced over. One chuckled and returned to her phone. The front desk attendant silently avoided Maya's eyes. Her daughter clutched her hand, not out of fear, but confusion. 8 years old, full of hope and nervousness. She just wanted to learn karate like the kids she watched on TV. Maya had promised her the best beginner school in the city. This was it. Instead, she was being talked down to before she even stepped off the welcome mat. Maya said nothing. She pulled the enrollment sheet gently from her bag and handed it over. The instructor raised an eyebrow, still doubting, still smirking. A breath of air moved behind her as more families walked through the glass doors into the sparkling facility. The floor gleamed beneath LED lights, and floor-to-ceiling mirrors repeated clean white walls back into infinity. This dojo wasn't just a training center, it was a brand. Framed magazine features lined the entrance wall. Building champions of character. Jake Morrison, head instructor and former regional karate champion, ran it like a showroom. Discipline, he preached, was everything, except when it came to controlling his own bias. What he disguised as casual leadership was something colder beneath the surface. Judgment dressed as friendliness, gatekeeping in a performance uniform. He took Maya's form and barely scanned it. "All right, we'll see how she handles the first trial week." The words trial twisted slightly as they left his mouth. Maya and her daughter, Janelle, followed directions to a narrow bench along the side of the mat. As other children lined up in full uniform, parents adjusted headbands, coordinated snacks, high-fived instructors. Maya remained seated, blending into the shadows. A quiet guardian keeping watch. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. She just watched and waited. The longer she sat, the clearer it became. Her child wasn't just a student here. She was a test. During class, Janelle was corrected more often than any beginner. Every wobbly stance felt like a strike against her value. When another child tumbled during a turn, Jake laughed and called it part of the learning. But when Janelle hesitated, he told the class that some kids need more structure at home. Maya blinked. "Where are you from? Have you ever been judged based on your appearance before you even spoke a word? If you believe discrimination has no place in the world, hit that subscribe button for more such inspiring stories." Maya had experienced these moments before. In tastefully decorated schools where her questions were called aggression. In pediatric clinics that asked if her daughter lived with both parents before checking her symptoms. In grocery lines where her child's mismatched socks were blamed on neglect. Not an honest morning in a rushed household. This was structured failure. Polished and practiced. She'd seen it before. Janelle finished her class with a stiff bow and walked back to her mother. Her expression looked unsure, not quite discouraged, but not proud either. Like she'd been told to smile but didn't know what for. Maya crouched down gently, tying her daughter's shoelaces. Her movements were patient, careful, purposefully calm. Jake approached again, all too eager. "I'd suggest a few private sessions," he offered, looking past Maya while speaking to her. "Some of the kids who come from less athletic backgrounds need more muscle memory work." It was the word "less" that lingered in the air, heavy as thunder before a storm. Maya looked at her daughter, then back at Jake. Her breath left quietly, but her stare stayed, long enough for him to squirm. Still, she said nothing. Jake took her silence as disinterest or maybe confirmation. He walked off with the same confident swagger, already talking with another parent about upcoming belt tests. Maya sat quietly with her daughter, zipped her bag, and praised her for trying her best. She didn't mention the private lesson offer. She didn't explain Jake's tone. Children sense more than we give them credit for. Janelle knew something was off, but her mother's composure told her, "Not everything deserves your energy. Some things deserve your preparation." Maya stood, thanked the receptionist on the way out, and walked through the front doors as if the weight of the building didn't deserve a single part of her burdens. But cameras had seen enough. 3 parents were already whispering near the shoe racks, replaying the conversation in their heads. One even tucked their phone away after capturing part of the instructor's suggestion. None said anything, yet the air in the dojo was still polished, still bright. The mirrors still reflected confidence and structure. But behind those reflections, a different picture was forming. A mother, dismissed in plain view. A daughter, assumed lesser before she even bowed. And a silence, calm as breath, but sharper than any punch. This story didn't start with sparring gloves or strikes. It started with a smirk. And beneath it, a long, coiled history of underestimation waiting, ever so patiently, to unfold. The next class felt different, but not in a better way. Maya was back at Elite Strike Academy with her daughter Janelle, sitting on the same bench near the wide mats. The room buzzed with the same polished energy. Kids laughing, parents chatting, trainers calling out instructions. The floor still shimmered under perfect lighting. Banners still hung proudly from the high ceilings, but Maya could feel it, right below the shiny surface. The coldness had thickened since their last visit. She watched as Janelle stepped onto the mat again, small but brave, her ponytail bouncing with each careful step. And almost instantly, the instructor's attention landed on her like a spotlight turned too high. Jake Morrison, still running the class with loud confidence, greeted the students with forced warmth. But when it came to Janelle, the tone dropped. The corrections started early, more dramatic this time. When other students fumbled through drills, Jake nodded and encouraged. But when Janelle's front kick missed the proper angle, he announced to the group, louder than needed, that some students need extra time to catch up. Maya didn't move, though her fingers pressed deeper into the soft fabric of her seat. The other parents were hearing the difference now, she could tell. A few shifted uncomfortably. One mother avoided looking at her altogether. Lines form quickly in places like these. Invisible ones, drawn from assumption and sealed with silence. As the class went on, Jake's critiques of Janelle became more about character than position. Too slow. Not focused enough. Needs better discipline. She heard him repeat the word structure 3 times, making it sound like a warning, not a suggestion. The other kids began to glance at Janelle when her name was called, eyes carrying the same confusion she had seen before in the waiting room. The punch didn't have to be physical. It landed all the same. Meanwhile, Maya stayed quiet, watchful. This wasn't her first time sitting unseen in plain sight. She had lived too many years where the room reshaped itself around her, where people edited themselves not out of fairness, but fear of being called out, not fear of causing pain. This was not new, but each time it pressed into her chest with the same weight, because now her daughter was learning the lesson before she needed to, that some people think less of you not because of what you show, but because of what they see. Halfway through class, the assistant instructor, a younger man named Kyle, took over some of the warm-up patterns. He looked occasionally toward Maya, uncertainty in his glance. She felt he understood something wasn't sitting right, but like so many people, he said nothing. Silence has its own weight. It often speaks more clearly than words. Then came a drill pairing. Jake split the students into groups for a friendly competition. Kicks to pads, points for control and height. Janelle was paired with a boy nearly a head taller. There were other partners available, more evenly matched, but somehow this is where she ended up. Maya blinked slowly. She had seen this too. The boy was polite. Janelle kicked with all she had. But after one round, Jake called time and handed the win to the boy as if Janelle's effort didn't count. "You're not hitting hard enough," he said. Not softly, not privately, just loud enough for all the parents to hear. Maya exhaled through her nose, quiet and deep, like a wave rising then settling at the edge of the ocean. Her hands folded in her lap, but her posture was steel. Jake moved on without looking back. You could tell he thought he was still in control. After class, Jake made his way over with that same uncomfortable energy. Too forced, too bright. A salesman trying to close a deal he didn't believe in. He talked about upcoming belt testing and said he wasn't quite sure if Janelle was progressing fast enough. Then he transitioned into a suggestion, private lessons. Again, this time just with him. He used words like investment and commitment, but none of it sounded supportive. It sounded like doubt packaged as help. Like the kind of offer made when you've already decided something about a person. Maya nodded slowly. She didn't bite. She never had to, because the room was growing more aware with each visit. A few parents who hadn't looked her way before now offered small signs. Nods, smiles, uncertainty. One father who worked in design had recorded the drill competition to show his son's form later. While reviewing the clip with his wife, he paused, rewound, watched how Jake spoke to Janelle, how she still bowed respectfully after being dismissed, how Maya remained calm every single moment, even as her child was being chipped away piece by piece. The father didn't speak to Maya. Not yet, but that clip was saved. That night, Maya tucked her daughter in gently. Janelle hadn't asked too many questions. She was tired, quiet, the kind of tired that's less about play and more about pretending all day that things feel fair when they don't. Once her daughter's eyes closed, Maya opened her own tablet. She found her old email with the dojo's welcome packet. 3 paragraphs about their commitment to diversity and respect for all families, regardless of background. Corporate sponsors listed like a constellation of logos on the bottom margin. She started a new folder, marked it Receipts. Each time Jake raised his voice, each time Janelle was treated with less patience, Maya wrote it down. Time, date, context, names. Because silence doesn't mean surrender. Quiet doesn't mean invisible. And watching is the beginning of every rebalancing. Cameras had seen parts, but Maya had seen it all, and she was just getting started. Word travels faster than intention. By the time Maya and Janelle returned for their 3rd week at Elite Strike Academy, something had shifted in the air. Not in volume, but in awareness. There was no announcement, no confrontation, no official acknowledgement. But people felt it. The quiet mother with the firm eyes wasn't blending anymore. Not entirely. She couldn't. The tone Jake Morrison had used, heavy with suggestion and manufactured concern, had not gone unnoticed. And in the age of phones that record and networks that move without asking permission, a single comment becomes a ripple. A glance becomes a sign. One of the parents who sat near Maya the week before had mentioned the incident on her private parenting forum. Not in anger, just in reflection. I'm pretty sure the instructor talked down to this black mom like she didn't belong. If anyone else noticed, was it just me? What began as a question turned into a thread. 37 replies in 2 days. Half had stories of their own. A few had video clips. And one had recognized Maya. She used to train. I don't remember much, but she fought professionally. I think internationally. The temperature had raised, not in fire, but in quiet pressure. So on that 3rd week, when Maya re-entered the studio with her daughter, everything looked the same, but nothing truly was. The front desk girl offered a smile that stayed 1 second longer. The instructor assistant, Kyle, waved to Janelle with open palms, something he hadn't done before. But Jake was unchanged, still in his black uniform, still pacing with the weight of assumed authority. To him, power was presence and posture. And from where he stood, Maya's silence still meant control. She was still invisible in his story, a mother of one of those kids who just needed more guidance. The class began as usual, children lining up, parents seated around the edges, sipping coffee, adjusting camera phones. Maya sat with her hands resting easily over her knee, scanning the space, watching, not reacting. She was not there to disrupt. But the truth moved without her needing to. Jake's instructions flowed with speed now. More bark than bite. He clapped louder, corrected harder. He was trying to regain the spotlight. Janelle, paired this time with a student her own size, stayed focused. Still young, still nervous, but more determined than before. She had learned the art of performance under pressure, not through lessons but life. The drill that day involved partner movement and blocking. Simple taps. Controlled contact. Janelle's partner held a blocker pad. Janelle's strikes landed clean but quiet. Jake walked past both girls without comment. But when a rowdy group of boys did the same drill with harsher contact, he called it showing strength and clapped in approval. The message was always in the framing. Effort in some was honored, in others, ignored. One mother near the mat began to film, subtly, from her lap. Then another. There was no agreement among them, no plan, just a shared instinct. This may matter. At one point, Jake walked over and, in front of the class, told Janelle she could take a break if she was tired. Her movements, he said, looked a little off today. Janelle looked to her mother briefly. Maya simply nodded. Neither of them needed to argue. She had taught her daughter to find her breath long before anyone taught her how to strike with her hands. But it wasn't just Maya who noticed this time. Every parent whose child was corrected too softly or promoted too swiftly noticed. Every Asian or Latino father who had stood too long at the front counter without being offered help noticed. Every child who had waited patiently for encouragement that never came noticed. What Jake didn't realize was that his mic was always on. Not just when he spoke into it, but when his actions told the story louder. Then came the sparring demo portion, reserved usually for higher belts. Jake paused and looked over the room. "Let's show the parents how this works," he said, glancing casually toward Maya. The suggestion wasn't loud, but deliberate. He opened the mat to any parent who wants to try one or two basic moves. Several shifted uncomfortably. No one moved. He smiled with that same tilted smirk, the one he wore the first day. Then, in a measured, calm motion, Maya stood. No expression changed. No anger showed. She stepped softly forward and removed her jacket, revealing a fitted long-sleeve top beneath, simple, clean. Her spine straight, her eyes soft, but she moved like someone who already knew the floor. A whisper passed between two parents seated near the left corner. "She's going," one murmured. Jake adjusted suddenly, eyes flicking with interest. He hadn't really expected her to accept. The moms usually forced a laugh and waved it off. The dads always joked about hurting their back. Maya just stepped onto the mat. He welcomed her with dramatics, explaining the moves, the stance, the padding. He was speaking to the room again, to the rest of the parents, to the camera phones he assumed were watching for laughs. But Maya stood patiently, respectfully. Her hands carefully mirrored his demonstrations like someone copying a dance they already knew by heart. Jake overcorrected her position 3 times. She allowed it. She breathed. She nodded. He tossed a padded glove to her, not a real sparring glove, just light gear for a show. She caught it effortlessly. Then he motioned toward her to try blocking an incoming punch. His form was predictable, controlled. No damage intended. Just enough force to remind her who he believed he was. She leaned, slid. Her movement was not theatrical or fast, but exact. And in that single second, something inside the room cracked. You could feel it in how Kyle stepped slightly forward, in how the boy holding the camera near the wall forgot to sip his soda, in how silence replaced Jake's usual chuckle. Then Jake tried again. This time a sweeping kick, the kind used to catch parents off guard and lighten the mood with laughter. This time, Maya didn't just slide. She caught him. With one sharp pivot, she shifted, stepped inside his kick before it extended, and gently, almost too gently, guided him off balance. Not enough to hurt, just enough to unearth. Jake stumbled, caught himself, laughed nervously, but the moment was complete. He had reached for control and missed. And Maya? She still hadn't spoken. The room wasn't laughing. It was watching, carefully. A quiet flip had occurred. Not loud, but final. Something important had happened, though most couldn't quite name it. Jake Morrison carefully adjusted his uniform after the brief stumble. Nothing dramatic, just a couple of seconds off balance, his center slipping before he could catch it. No harm, no fall. But the energy in the room had changed. His usually booming voice held less shine now, his smile a little more forced. He made a brief joke to ease the tension, the kind of comment meant to brush off a moment that stuck heavier than it should. The laughter was thin. Parents exchanged glances, but fewer faces were smiling now. Maya had quietly stepped back to the edge of the mat, her breathing light, posture steady. She wasn't glowing with pride or trying to read the room's reaction. She simply picked up her jacket and sat back down beside her daughter, her presence as composed as the still surface of a river that had just swallowed a stone. But that moment lingered. People started to look more closely, not just at Maya, but at everything. At how often Janelle was the last to be chosen for a demonstration. At how Maya, for 3 weeks, had never once raised her voice, never pushed for different treatment, never corrected the instructor loudly, even when it was deserved. One of the younger instructors, Kyle, took over the rest of the sparring class. He moved with a quiet nervousness, as if suddenly reminded of a rule he should have been following all along: respect everyone. Include everyone. Jake moved to the back, pretending to give feedback, but mostly watching. Something in him had tightened. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the discomfort of being seen, of realizing the person you thought was beneath you had the capacity to dismantle your image without saying a word. Some of the parents resumed recording, this time not for entertainment but as insurance. Something about the way Maya had moved, the softness of her steps yet exactness of execution, didn't feel random. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't hesitated. She'd done something small, controlled, but highly effective. It didn't match the image she gave off as the quiet mom in plain clothes, the one who sat with her daughter and barely spoke unless necessary. Whispers started. Low, hesitant. I think she's trained. Did you see her footwork? That wasn't beginner stuff. Someone Googled Maya martial arts and started scrolling. It didn't take long. Her full name, Maya Hunter. Bits and pieces came into light, old press clippings, clips from semi-pro martial arts tournaments, mention of a gold medal in middleweight division years ago before she took a break. She had fought in national circuits, competed overseas, even taught briefly before focusing on motherhood. The silence that surrounded Maya now wasn't the dismissive kind. It was reverent, curious, tense. And right in the middle of it stood Jake, whose authority no longer looked absolute. Maya watched the class continue, her daughter still working through drills with a soft determination. What she saw on that mat wasn't just a group of kids learning kicks. It was a reflection of something deeper, the power balance between leaders and learners, between those who are blindly respected and those who are made to prove themselves 10 times over. She didn't want to be worshipped. She didn't want a spotlight. But for the first time, a few others were finally paying attention to the things she hadn't said. After class, there was a pause. Jake was quieter. Several parents thanked Maya as they passed, not with dramatic words, but a light touch on the elbow, a nod, a small glance that held more meaning than praise. One mother walked by slowly with her daughter and whispered just audibly, "Thank you for showing up." Maya only smiled, because showing up had never been the problem. Being seen was. Kyle approached Maya, this time more deliberately. There was something uncertain in his eyes, as if he'd finally realized he should have spoken up weeks ago, and now couldn't find the words. He asked gently if she knew martial arts, his voice as respectful as his stance. Maya nodded. No more, no less. He held her gaze, realizing she wasn't here to correct Jake. She was here for her daughter, like any parent. But she would no longer accept this being a place where respect was rationed out selectively. After she left, the dojo buzzed with unspoken thoughts. Jake pulled Kyle aside with hushed tension, asking what he thought had just happened. Even then, Jake's voice held that strained casualness, the kind that comes when someone's authority has cracked, but pride won't let it fall. He blamed his stumble on the mat surface, called the moment a lucky deflection, shrugged off the energy in the room. But Kyle didn't seem convinced. Neither did the parents, especially not Ella, a black mother in the audience who'd been watching for weeks. She'd come with her son, Eli, who had recently stopped wanting to attend. Now she understood why: the sideways instructions, the rushed corrections, the subtle ways her son had been left out. The pattern had been invisible until Maya made it visible. Maya didn't have to prove anything. She didn't need to spar. She never needed to. But by stepping forward for a simple drill and showing what grace and power truly looked like, She forced the room to switch perspectives. No outburst, no shouting match, no confrontations laden with heat, just precision, dignity, control. Later that night, short clips from the class trickled online. Nothing dramatic, just low-quality videos of a parent demonstration where one mother moved with astounding control. A few curious people reposted. A few remembered her name. And then someone shared the training footage of Maya from a few years ago. A highlight reel. Punches, spins, balance, calm. It didn't explode, not yet. But it sparked something quiet, like a whisper passing through a hallway. She's more than they thought. And now, everyone watching the dojo wasn't looking at Jake anymore. They were looking at Maya. And more importantly, they were starting to listen. It began with a name. Not hers. Not yet. But a shared clip under the caption. When the quiet mother on the bench moves like a ghost and teaches the master a lesson. A short video, shaky and dim, capturing Maya Hunter sidestepping a sparring attempt and guiding Jake to the ground with effortless grace. It was only 10 seconds long. But 10 seconds can be enough to change everything. The post stayed small at first, just circulating inside private martial arts groups and community forums. People whispered about her form, the stillness in her spine, the fluid way she absorbed and returned energy. A few commented variations of the same realization. That was no beginner. You don't move like that unless you've lived inside every inch of a dojo. Then someone asked the question everyone else was circling around. Who is she? And someone answered. Her name was Maya Hunter, former national champion in point-style martial arts, former semi-pro MMA fighter, trained under a renowned instructor in California, winner of multiple regional titles, once considered Olympic-bound before she stepped back from competition altogether to raise her daughter. Quietly, without fanfare, the silence she wore now wasn't new. It was part of her discipline. And the videos began gathering more speed, not because Maya wanted them to, or even knew they existed at first, but because truth finds light eventually, especially when it stands in stark contrast to arrogance. Jake Morrison's reputation had always ridden on a tightrope of charm and authority. To many, he was the expert, the one who could mold any child into something stronger. His studio was expensive, but people believed the cost came with results. And then, in 10 seconds, that belief started to tremble. Maya's name started trending alongside footage of Jake's brief stumble on the mat. But the focus wasn't on his fall, it was on her posture. Her restraint. The lack of ego in her movements. How she allowed the moment to unfold and spoke nothing with her mouth, yet everything with her body. Articles followed. Blog posts with titles like, The Power of Stillness, and She didn't come here for you to applaud, she came for her daughter. Comments stacked thousands thick with people praising not just Maya's physical skill but her emotional command. Some mothers started sharing similar stories. How instructors had spoken beneath their breath. How kids who looked like theirs were always the problem students. Always behind. Always the ones told to prove themselves harder. And each thread, each voice, added to the fire. Meanwhile, Maya stayed with her routine. Morning teas, homework, gym visits with Janelle on sleepy afternoons. She hadn't sought attention. She had simply acted from instinct. Just one step forward when invited. Just one demonstration. She hadn't even raised her hand. And yet, she had raised a mirror to the world. The video had reached Elite Strike Academy's corporate franchise office by the end of the week. Most of the parents at Maya's dojo knew before the board did, because some of them helped spread it. What surprised many was not just the fallout, but how fast it arrived once the truth surfaced. In less than a day, calls began flooding the front desk. Parents who had smiled through discomfort were now demanding answers. Social media posts tagged the franchise accounts, asking for audits, interviews, accountability. And then came the start of the real unraveling. A local news outlet published background on Jake Morrison, highlighting formal complaints from 2 years prior filed by parents about unequal treatment and disciplinary hostility. At the time, the reports were quietly closed. But this time, they weren't ignored. Corporate sent a team to the dojo, a formal in-person review, a surprise visit that Jake hadn't prepared for. A room full of stiff suits carrying clipboards, who recorded every word. When they asked Maya if she'd speak, she didn't raise her voice then either. She simply showed them her copy of the sign-up paperwork, where no mention had been made of her background. She described how her daughter had been treated during regular drills, how praise and correction seemed to follow a very specific pattern. No theatrics, no anger, just facts. And perhaps that did more damage than rage ever could have. Because once a system is named plainly, it cannot unsee itself. Jake wasn't just embarrassed. He was exposed, stripped not by confrontation but by contrast. Where he had wrapped power in tone and presence, Maya had unwrapped it with discipline and quiet confidence. She was everything the banners on the dojo walls claimed to honor: focus, honor, growth. And yet somehow all those traits had failed to shield her from assumption. So when the studio's corporate office released a statement days later, the words were calculated, but clear. The company promised updated training protocols. Internal audits would be expanded across all regional franchises. Jake Morrison was placed on suspension, pending further review. Though by then, most knew what that meant. But the most important detail in the statement wasn't about policies. It was the acknowledgement. They named her Maya Hunter. They didn't call her a mother. They didn't just call her a former fighter. They called her a standard, an embodiment of the leadership, humility, and mastery we strive to teach. That line alone sent shockwaves through community groups, sparking deep conversations across city forums and martial arts threads. Was respect truly being taught, or merely performed? Interview requests came. National outlets, podcasts, documentaries. Maya turned most down. She hadn't done this to climb back into the spotlight. Her spotlight was smaller, quieter, centered around her daughter's growth, her peace. But in one interview, she accepted one question. When asked why she hadn't made a scene, hadn't corrected Jake in front of everyone, hadn't puffed up her chest when he laughed that first day, her answer was simple. I don't correct the small version of someone. That's their job. I just try to stay whole. And that was what everyone saw. Whole power. Wholeness that did not need revenge. Only recognition. Back at the dojo, things continued, but nothing was quite the same. New instructors circulated. Diversity workshops began. Enrollment applications now included a detailed values statement. Parents were asked to give feedback anonymously each month. And on a quiet Sunday, a new poster was added outside the observation room. Black text against white, no photos, no names. It read, "Visible strength is not always louder. Sometimes it stands, silent and still." Underneath were three simple words: respect, equity, truth. And though no one said it aloud, everyone knew whose presence had lit that long-needed fire. She had not needed a mic. She had not needed a stage. All she needed was a moment. The days that followed were slower but heavier. What had once been a polished routine inside Elite Strike Academy now moved like a performance under review. Nothing had changed on the surface. The crisp uniforms, the militant chants, the structured drills. But beneath the sharpening of stances and the barked instructions, something more fragile was unfolding. Something harder to rebuild than muscle, trust. The whispers had quieted, but their echoes stayed behind like fingerprints on glass. Jake Morrison was gone, on leave pending investigation, as the front desk now explained. But more than his absence, it was his exposure that left a mark. His voice had always filled the room. Now silence sat louder, thicker. The students noticed it too. The younger ones didn't know how to name what felt different, but they moved more cautiously now. Not in fear of punishment, but of disappointment, of a broken illusion. Parents watched more intently. A woman who always scrolled on her phone during class now leaned forward, eyes narrowed. A father who had hailed Jake's coaching style weeks earlier asked the assistant instructor why no student curriculum had ever been shared. Questions bloomed like wildflowers in a field that had once been tightly trimmed. Maya, as always, stayed on the edges. Still no celebration. Still no spectacle. Just silent presence. She brought Janelle in every week as though nothing had happened. But her daughter now carried herself differently. With more steadiness. With the quiet understanding that her mother had shifted the world. and she didn't have to raise her voice to believe in her own value. Maya didn't have to correct the system loudly. Her stillness had done most of the work. But now the system had to correct itself. The corporate response transformed from formal to systemic. After acknowledging Maya's name publicly in their apology statement, the elite strike company sent observers, not martial artists, but human resources specialists and justice consultants, into every one of their dojos across the region. Not to teach kata, but to take notes, to listen. They sat down in folding chairs next to parents who had spent months feeling awkward, overlooked, or quietly tolerated. They held confidential conversations with students who had rarely been asked how they felt about how they were treated, especially the black and brown children who didn't always receive the praise others did. What they found wasn't just isolated behavior. It was the same structure hiding behind different instructors, the same language guarded in politeness but rooted in bias. Assumptions about who learns slower, who lacks discipline, who needs more basic reinforcement, who gets offered pads with guidance, and who gets handed them as proof to earn the room's respect. The facts were hard to deny. Anonymous parent feedback from multiple locations referenced terms like cultural mismatch, strong-willed students, and low performance expectations. These weren't facts, just coded phrases. Old stories retold through new scripts. But this time, the patterns lit up like neon in the data reported back to boardrooms. So the company didn't just revise policies. It began removing entire pillars. The Tough Love training module was replaced with culturally aware discipline, a program developed with equity experts specializing in community sports. Dojos were required to complete a 360-degree feedback cycle each quarter. Instructors reviewing students, students reviewing instructors, parents reviewing both. Every member of leadership was now required to attend ethics and anti-bias workshops. Live, not virtual. And as for Jake Morrison, the investigation, once slow and measured, accelerated. The footage didn't lie. Comments on tape. Repeated patterns of exclusion logged by fellow staff. Cases closed too quickly now opened again. Within a month, his contract was terminated. There was no lawsuit, no screaming headline, just an exit that stayed quiet for once. His dismissal came through a short press release focused on creating healthier leadership models. A line that said everything without naming the wound. Maya never commented. Not once. She received a formal apology in writing, signed by the regional board. It sat unopened for a week on her kitchen table before she eventually filed it with other quiet wins that had cost too much to brag about. Her reward wasn't in headlines. It was in her daughter's face. Janelle now smiled wider when she bowed, moved more freely during warm-ups. She had become close with two other girls, both children of color, who once stood off to the side just like her. Now they laughed more, grouped together without fear of being talked over or made into an example. Maya had pierced a hole in the canopy, and now the light was getting in. Not everywhere, not perfect, but enough. Then came the unexpected call. The same sports network that had once passed over Maya during her competition years, without reason, now reached out. But they didn't just want her to talk about what happened. They wanted something bigger. They invited her to co-create a new series within a larger program. Discipline and Dignity. Rebuilding Respect Through Modern Martial Arts. A televised, real-world examination of race, bias, and youth development in sports, and how to change it, starting from the inside. She accepted with a single request. No drama, just real stories. And solutions. Months later, that program would air on public television and streaming platforms. Schools used clips in classrooms. Parents recommended it to other families feeling alone. Coaches everywhere, from football to fencing, quietly took notes. But back at the dojo, Maya remained the same. She sat as she always had. Calm. Solid. Invisible unless you paid close attention. Some days, new parents would enter unaware of who she was. They might look past her, assume she was just waiting, regular, uninvolved. But their children. Many now ran to Janelle after class with questions, laughter, confidence. They saw her as strong, as a leader, and through her they saw Maya too. The dojo installed a new section of its lobby wall, a commitment wall. Not trophies, Not medals, but a series of framed values, rewritten with community input. Beneath them, small photo tiles of families who helped shape the space with love and courage. There was one photo near the bottom, almost easy to miss. Maya and Janelle sitting together. No spotlight overhead, just a still frame of presence. Because sometimes the loudest changes don't begin with a fight. They begin with someone refusing to be overlooked again. Months passed, and with them, the shine of headlines faded. The online buzz quieted. The camera crews moved on. But the change? That stayed. The dojo had begun to breathe differently. For years, Elite Strike Academy had been known for its polish, perfect uniforms, crisp drills, competitive successes. A brand more than a community. But now it looked and felt more human. Older banners were replaced with murals drawn by neighborhood kids. The once silent waiting room now invited parents into weekly observation and discussion circles. Flyers announced workshops on cultural sensitivity, and open mat days were designed not to show off skill, but to build trust between instructors, families, and students. It wasn't just surface-level change. What had happened in that first room, the quiet shift born from Maya's presence and restraint, had penetrated deeper. All across the franchise network, from suburban dojos to urban hubs, the question kept being asked again and again, louder now. Who is this for? Who truly feels welcomed here? Who feels seen? Every franchise was now measured by more than numbers and belt advancements. They were being asked to tend to fairness equally, consistently. Instructors once ranked only by competition results were now evaluated on their emotional intelligence, cultural awareness, and ethical leadership. A handful of them resisted, quietly stepping away, unwilling to change their outlook or listen. But the majority stayed. Not because they were forced, but because they finally realized the damage they'd helped normalize, the harm of unconscious bias, of assumption, of small daily dismissals carved into the very structure of their teaching. They learned because they were watching what had nearly been lost. Trust from families like Maya's. Trust from their students of color. Respect delayed, often denied, that had finally broken free into daylight. Maya, for her part, never claimed the spotlight. She turned down the article features, the viral interviews, the award recognition. Attention was never her goal, and certainly not her tool. What she had done was much bigger than a social statement. She had made a living, breathing space better for her daughter. That was legacy. Janelle became bolder in class, not from new praise, but from an absence of fear. She started raising her hand when instructors asked questions, volunteered for drills. She even wrote her own essay at school about her favorite place in the world. She titled it, "The Floor That Remembers." In the essay, she described the mat under her bare feet. The place where she had once felt invisible until her mother stepped onto it. Not with noise, but with truth carved into every movement. Her teacher cried after reading it. Not out of sadness, but recognition. Elsewhere, the ripples extended toward broader change. Youth sport organizations began revisiting their leadership guides. A national nonprofit focused on equity in athletics featured Maya's story, without sensationalizing it. They renamed an annual grant program after her, the Hunter Foundation Fund, supporting BIPOC parents and caregivers raising young athletes. But perhaps the most meaningful gesture came in silence. One afternoon, on a breezy Saturday, Maya returned to the dojo alone. Janelle was visiting a friend. The building was quieter than usual, preparation mode for a community event. Inside, Maya paused before entering. She didn't wear her usual hoodie. She had on a dark blue warm-up jacket, simple and clean. Several parents recognized her and offered small, knowing smiles. But no one interrupted. Her presence no longer felt out of place. It was part of the foundation now. The studio had installed something new that week, just a simple bench, placed next to the observation area. It faced the mat directly. A plaque beside it read, "In honor of those who lead with humility, you are seen. Your silence holds power." It didn't have her name, but it didn't need to. Maya sat there for a moment, just breathing, not watching over anyone, not waiting to be acknowledged, just being. She wasn't preparing to spar, teach, or correct. She simply occupied the space she had reshaped with presence alone. There were no banners for her victories, no belts hanging beneath her photo. But in the way the instructors spoke gentler to nervous new students, in the way every staff member now knew how to pronounce each child's name correctly, in the way other parents of color now sat more comfortably, her influence was everywhere. She hadn't changed the dojo with commands. She had changed it by refusing to shrink. That was the difference. And in that difference, dozens of voices, once stifled, had found their space to rise. Years from now, people might forget the details, the video, the stumble, the tension, but they would remember how the room felt afterward, how it turned inward to examine itself, how policy became practice and intention became structure. They would remember that the most important change didn't come through a fight. It came through grace under pressure, through dignity without defense, through a mother who showed that power isn't always what you wield. Sometimes it's what you protect. And so, this isn't just Maya's story. It belongs to every person who's been underestimated at first glance, who's been spoken over, doubted, judged too soon. To every child who has waited to feel safe in a room that was supposed to uplift them. To every parent silently holding both strength and softness in balance. If you're one of them, or if you believe stories like this need to be heard so no one feels alone again, hit that subscribe button, share this message, and tell us your thoughts below. Because real change doesn't just come from breaking silence. Sometimes it begins with choosing not to walk away.